One of the biggest things that goes into any given match of Siege is the operator bans. Depending on what each team bans, the game can shift drastically in one or the other's favor. And with a lot of players banning the same few operators every match, they're missing out on a lot of potential. So in today's video, I'll be showing you how to use the operator ban system to win you more games. I'll be going over the best operators to ban, when to ban them, and why. So if you want to learn something new, strap in, because some of these bans will surprise you. Now, the first two operators that I recommend you consider banning is Tuberao and Cade. Now, the reason why you'd want to ban these two operators is for very similar reasons, and that is because with them on the board, it is a lot harder to get reinforced hatches and walls open. So banning them on maps with a lot of important walls and hatches like Clubhouse, Nighthaven, and Oregon can help you a lot, especially if you're starting out on the attacking side first. This is because if you allow Tuberao and Cade to exist at the same time, Tuberao can use their canisters to burn a total of 30 seconds off of the clock against your team, and Cade can use his Cade claws to electrify a maximum of 6 walls in a round, which is insane in comparison to operators like Bandit. Additionally, since Cade's claws can be thrown, he also has the unique ability to electrify hatches, which makes it a lot harder to get hatches open on maps like Bank. Trust me, if you start banning Tuberao or Cade in your matches, you'll start getting walls and hatches open a whole lot easier. Now, the opposite applies to the next operator I recommend you start banning, and that is Maverick. The reason why you'd want to consider banning Maverick is because Maverick can just outright bypass any sort of wall denial you bring on your team. So if you bring a Bandit, if you bring a Cade, if you bring a Tuberao, it doesn't matter. Maverick can just start using his blowtorch to open up the reinforced wall, and you realistically can't do anything about it. This makes Maverick extremely useful on maps like Clubhouse, Nighthaven, and Oregon, like I mentioned earlier, because of the fact that there's so many important walls on that map. But Maverick's strength doesn't just apply to walls. He can also use his blowtorch to just bypass Cade Electroclaws on hatches as well, making him really strong on maps like Bank and Cafe. Because of this, if you ban Maverick when starting on the defense first, you can then start bringing a combination of Cade, Tuberao, or Bandit, and the enemy team is going to have a lot harder time getting those important reinforcements open, especially if you start Cade or Bandit tricking, since they're going to be forced to either perfectly time their EMPs or to clear you from below. Overall, Maverick is an extremely strong ban depending on the map, and if you pick your operators around that ban, it can make winning those defense rounds a whole lot easier. Now, the next operator I recommend you consider when picking an operator to ban is Warden. Now, most of you are probably thinking, how could a Warden ban possibly be useful? And well, that comes down to one important reason, and that is because without Warden, the enemy team has no way to counter smoke grenades, and they have no way to get around flashbangs. And so when your team starts banning Warden and they start abusing operators like Ying, Glaz, and Capitao, it makes the defensive team's job a living nightmare, because they have no way to deal with your Capitao smoke bolts, they have no way to deal with your Ying Candelas or your smoke grenades, and Glaz can just sit inside the map and take advantage of his smoke grenades and deal with 0 consequences. Banning Warden for this strategy can be extremely useful on small maps like Border and Coastline, where the attack spends a lot of time outside, because of the fact that it allows Glaz, Ying, and Capitao to shine. Now, you do have to keep in mind that when you ban Warden, Wamai and Jaeger still exist, so you're still going to have to burn ADSs to be able to get your smoke grenades into the bomb site and to get your Ying Candelas into the bomb site. But once you do, you're pretty much guaranteed to get utility out of it, because Warden is not going to be a factor. Now, moving on to the fourth operator on my list, I recommend you start banning Ying. Ying is starting to climb up on the ban rate charts recently, and I've noticed a lot of higher ranks are starting to ban her. But this philosophy hasn't made its way to the lower ranks, and I think it should, because banning Ying is an extremely smart decision. In the current meta, Ying is one of the strongest operators on the attack, hands down. Her 4 Candelas allow her to exert a ton of pressure onto the defensive team, and since she comes with smoke grenades alongside of it, having Ying on the board basically forces you to run Warden in every round, because you don't want to have your entire team flashbanged and smoked out of the bomb site. And so when banning Ying, you don't have to deal with that super annoying ability anymore, and you're freeing up a spot on your team because you're no longer having to pick a Warden, and you can honestly get away with not picking a Jaeger or a Wamai in certain rounds as well. Trust me when I say banning Ying is a really good decision, especially if you don't have anyone else better to ban. Now, moving on to the next operator that I recommend you start banning, that being Valk. Valk is an operator that has always been extremely strong in the Siege meta. Her ability to give her team access to a ton of intel through her cameras is extremely strong, and that nitro cell that she has at her disposal also allows her to get a ton of free kills for her team, and it makes her a pretty lethal threat on maps with a lot of vertical play. This is why banning Valk on maps that promote aggression for the defense, like Canal, Border, Skyscraper, and Bank, is going to be a smart play, because it stops the defense from having as much intel on your team, which is going to allow you to not have to worry about getting nitro through the floor as often. And since Valkyrie is picked so much on these maps, you'll probably end up saving your team a lot of time in the long run having to search for those Valkyrie cameras. Being able to reduce the amount of cameras on the defense is huge, and so banning Valkyrie is strong on pretty much every map, but it's even a smarter decision on the maps that I mentioned earlier where she can excel. Now, the sixth operator that I recommend you start banning, which I actually think is an extremely smart decision in the current meta, is Montagne. Montagne has become an absolute powerhouse after the recent shield rework. His ability to gather intel for his team and also be pretty aggressive is unmatched in the current state of Siege. He's especially strong on maps with a lot of tight corridors and choke points. Think of maps like Bank, Clubhouse, Border, and Oregon, which just so happen to be the maps that he's most picked on in my experience. And so banning him from the enemy team's lineup is going to make your job a lot easier on those maps. For example, on Clubhouse, you'll no longer have to deal with a Montaigne trying to walk up rafter stairs when you're defending the CCTV bomb site. And on Border, you'll no longer have to deal with a Montaigne pushing down the armory balcony. There's plenty more examples and strategies of where Montaigne is strong, and being able to remove those from the enemy team is huge. And not to mention, with the recent nerf to impact grenades, Montaigne is an extremely hard operator to counter in the current meta. There's only really a handful of ways to counter him. Oryx is one of them, Legion is another, and then just bringing a ton of nitro cells is another way to deal with them. But none of those are guaranteed, and a lot of the time, if the enemy team is bringing a Finka or something, they can just heal off the chip damage that Monty takes from those explosives and those Legion mines. So when you leave Montaigne on the board, it allows him to basically function as a tank in Siege, taking all of the utility from your team like smoke grenades and nitro cells, allowing his team to later in the round go for a plant. So getting rid of this is going to be a huge benefit to your team, and I definitely recommend you start considering banning Montaigne a lot more. Now for the next operator, Mute, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by him being on this list, but trust me, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're starting off on the attack. The reason why banning Mute is so strong is for obvious reasons. It allows your team to drone relatively unhindered, and because of that, it allows your team to bring operators like Brava and Twitch the whole game without having to worry about being countered, which is definitely a huge benefit. It allows Brava to easily get her drones into sight and start hacking defender utility to switch it to your team, and it allows Twitch to sneak her drones around the map to potentially deal with any mirror windows that the enemy team might have, any Kate Electroclaws and stuff like that. Additionally, banning Mute also has benefits to your team outside of just droning. It allows you to bring operators like Deimos and Dokkaebi every round and you won't be countered. This is because if an operator is in the area of a Mute jammer when Deimos is scanning or when Dokkaebi is calling, both of their gadgets are null and void. Deimos will not see the defender through walls, and Dokkaebi's call will never go off on that defender's phone. This is pretty huge, and it's Deimos and Dokkaebi's pretty much only main counter. So by eliminating Mute from the enemy team's roster, it basically allows you to run rampant with both of those operators. Trust me, if you start banning Mute and start taking advantage of those operators I mentioned, you'll notice a huge benefit to your team. And it'll also just help you later in the round when your team needs a drone. And speaking of Deimos, the 8th operator that I recommend you start banning more is Deimos himself. The reason why I think banning Deimos is so strong in the current meta is because, like I said, he only has one real counter, and that is Mute. Which basically means that if Deimos decides to scan you while you're on a roam or something, and you're not close to a Mute jammer, you're basically guaranteed to die, or at the very least, you're going to find yourself in a very bad situation. Because Deimos can call out your position to the entire enemy team, and this is why Deimos is pretty much a useful ban on every map. Because no matter what map you're on, being able to see a defender through walls is always going to be extremely strong. So to free up an operator slot on your team so you don't have to pick Mute every round, and to also allow your team to play inside the bomb site without being shot through the floor, I think banning Deimos is a really smart decision. It will help to remove an annoying operator off the enemy team's roster, and it'll allow you to move around freely. Now moving on past Deimos, my next operator is probably going to be another controversial pick on this list, but I think banning him is an extremely smart decision if you pick strategies around it. And that operator is Wamai. Wamai is a useful ban for the reasons you'd expect. It removes a significant amount of the defensive side's projectile denial, which means that you can get things like flashbangs and smoke grenades into the bomb site a lot easier. And it basically forces the defense to go Jaeger if they want to deal with those forms of projectiles. And it also has the added benefit of allowing you to bring operators like Grim, Capitao, and Ying and just run rampant on the bomb site. And in Capitao's case specifically, it leaves him completely uncountered. Capitao's only counter to his fire bolts and smoke bolts is Wamai, because Wamai's magnets can catch his bolts. Capitao's bolts can still go through Jaeger ADSs. So by banning Wamai, you can bring Capitao every round and your bolts will never be countered, allowing you to always get utility out of them. And in Grim and Ying's case, since Wamai is banned, you'll have to burn as much utility off the defense to be able to get your gadgets into the bomb site. So instead of having to deal with 5 magnets and 3 Jaeger ADSs, you now only have to deal with 3 Jaeger ADSs, which means that Grim can just use some of his EMPs or some of his Bs to burn those ADSs and then get his Bs into the site, and the same thing applies to Ying. So if you as a player or if your team really likes to bring these 3 operators, this ban can be a really smart decision to help aid in your playstyle. And you can also make this strategy even stronger by bringing a ton of flashbangs and smoke grenades on other operators as well. Now moving on to the 10th and the final operator I recommend you start banning, that is Osa. Osa as an operator is an inherently niche pick because her shields allow her to excel at holding long angles and being able to hold down areas of the map. So her shields allow her to excel on maps where she can sit outside and hold long angles into the bomb site behind her shield. Maps like Chalet, Clubhouse, Nighthaven, Oregon, and Coastline are great examples of this. But while she is a niche operator, if you ban her on the maps where she's strong, it'll make your life a whole lot easier. There have been many times on Coastline specifically where an Osa has single-handedly won the enemy team around because they walked into the bomb site with an Osa shield and then got the plant down behind the shield. Or they just used their shields in strong positions to cut off long lines of sight from my team. This is why on Coastline and sometimes Nighthaven specifically, me and my team like to ban Osa a lot. Her strength on those maps are just really unmatched. And especially now with the nerf to impact grenades, it makes it a lot harder to counter an Osa once she's behind her shield. So if you want to make the attacking team job a little harder when planting the bomb down, and you don't want to have to deal with attackers sitting on bulletproof lines of sight, banning Osa can be a really strong decision for your team. But it just kind of depends on your playstyle and what map you're on. Anyways, that about wraps up today's video. As always, these videos are strictly my opinion, and if you disagree, feel free to leave your takes in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, I'll be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you'll all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.